Welcome to Crossdressing Stories. Here, we share personal stories, celebrate self-expression. If you're on your own journey or simply curious, you've found your community. Subscribe and join the conversation.
The fluorescent lights of the office bathroom hummed, casting a sterile, unforgiving glare. Madden stared at his reflection, but the man looking back felt like a poorly constructed costume. The tie, a silk noose in a muted corporate blue, felt too tight. The stiff collar of his button-down shirt chafed his neck. He saw the faint stubble shadowing his jaw, the short, practical haircut, the weary set of his 32-year-old eyes. This was the face of Madden, the competent, reliable senior engineer. It was a mask he had worn for so long that he feared it had fused to his skin. All day, the feeling had been particularly acute. It was the casual, unthinking way his colleague Robert had slapped him on the back, booming, "Attaboy, Madden. Knew you'd crack that code." It was the forced, low chuckle he'd had to produce when his team lead told a locker room joke. Each instance was a small paper cut on his soul, a reminder of the profound, aching dissonance between the person he was forced to be and the person who screamed silently inside him. He felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. That evening, the feeling followed him home, clinging to him like the city's humidity. He walked through the door of his quiet apartment, the one place he could shed the suffocating weight of being Madden. Tonight, the silence wasn't a comfort, it was an accusation. For years, he had lived on the precipice of a decision, teetering between the terror of change and the agony of stagnation. Tonight, something shifted. It was the memory of Robert's booming voice, the feel of that unwanted hand on his back. It was the culmination of 10,000 tiny surrenders. He walked into his bedroom, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He went to the back of his closet, behind the neat rows of drab menswear, and pulled out a box. It was his secret, his treasure chest of hope and fear. Inside was a simple, navy blue A-line dress ordered late one night 6 months ago in a moment of desperate courage. There was a wig, a soft cascade of chestnut brown hair he'd bought from a specialty online store, its synthetic fibers still smelling of the factory. And there was a makeup kit, a beginner's set he'd purchased at a drugstore in a neighboring town, his face burning with shame as he paid the cashier. With trembling hands, he began. He stripped off the costume of Madden, leaving the suit and tie in a heap on the floor like a shed skin. The dress slid over his shoulders, its soft, flowing fabric a revelation against his skin. It felt right. Terrifyingly, wonderfully right. He sat before his dresser and fumbled with the makeup, trying to replicate the soft, natural look he'd seen in countless online tutorials. The foundation was patchy, the eyeliner uneven, but as he worked, a different person began to emerge. Finally, he positioned the wig, adjusting the bangs to frame his face. He stood up and turned to face the full-length mirror on the back of his bedroom door. And there she was. The reflection was both a stranger and a long-lost friend. The person in the mirror was tentative, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. But she was undeniably her. The lines of her face, softened by makeup, looked less weary. The dress gave her a shape that felt innate, a silhouette he had only ever dreamed of. A wave of fear, cold and sharp, washed over him. This was madness. This was a point of no return. But a stronger, deeper current pulled him forward, a profound sense of homecoming. He was looking at his own soul, finally given form. This was Meline. The name had come to him years ago, a whisper in the back of his mind, a beautiful, secret sound that belonged only to her. A choked sob escaped his lips. The sheer, overwhelming relief of it was a physical blow. He had spent a lifetime feeling like a puzzle with the wrong pieces. Now, for the first time, he felt whole. He needed to tell someone. The secret was too big, too momentous to hold alone. His hand, shaking, reached for his phone. He scrolled to the one name he knew he could trust, the one person who had seen him through every other crisis in his life, without judgment. He pressed dial. "Renee? Can you come over? It's important." His voice was a raw, unfamiliar thing. Renee, his best friend since a shared engineering elective in college, arrived 20 minutes later, a bag of takeout in one hand. "Hey, what's the four-alarm fire?" "I brought peace offerings," she announced cheerfully as she let herself in. Her voice died in her throat as she stepped into the bedroom and saw him. Her eyes, wide with shock, took in the entire scene: the dress, the wig, the tear-streaked, inexpertly applied makeup. For a long moment, she said nothing. Meline's carefully constructed composure shattered under her gaze. A fresh tear escaped, carving a black track of mascara down her cheek. She felt a familiar shame rise in her throat, hot and suffocating. She had made a terrible mistake. But then Renee's face softened. She set the food down on the dresser, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked over, pulled a tissue from the box on the nightstand, and gently, so gently, dabbed at the smudge beneath Meline's eye. Her touch was an anchor in a swirling sea of emotion. "Okay," Renee said, her voice a low, steady murmur. "Okay." She looked from Meline's tear-filled eyes to the reflection in the mirror and back again. A flicker of understanding, deep and compassionate, dawned on her face. "So, this is her." The simple acceptance in her voice broke the dam. "How long have you been hiding this?" Renee asked, her voice quiet. The question was a key unlocking a door that had been sealed for decades. Meline sank onto the edge of the bed, her body racked with sobs that seemed to come from the very core of her being. She cried for the little boy who knew he was different but had no words for it. She cried for the teenager who hated his changing body. She cried for the man who had perfected the art of being invisible. Renee sat beside her, placing a steadying hand on her back, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. When the sobs finally subsided into shuddering breaths, Meline looked at her friend, her eyes red and raw. "I don't want to live a lie anymore," she whispered, the words both a confession and a vow. "I can't." The weeks that followed Meline's confession to Renee were a strange, bifurcated existence. She began to live two lives, each with its own set of rules, its own wardrobe, its own voice. The strain of the partition was immense, a constant act of mental gymnastics that left her perpetually exhausted. By day, she was still Madden. She would wake before sunrise, shower, and meticulously shave the faint shadow from her face. She would bind her chest with a tight sports binder that left her short of breath, a constant, dull ache that was both a physical discomfort and a painful reminder of her charade. At the engineering firm, she was the consummate professional, quiet, focused, and efficient. She forced her voice into a lower register, participated in conversations about weekend sports she hadn't watched, and laughed at jokes she didn't find funny. It was a performance, and the stage was her life. Her colleagues saw a reliable, if somewhat reserved, engineer. They didn't see the silent screaming behind her eyes, the desperate count of the hours until she could go home. The office became a minefield of potential exposures. The most persistent threat was Robert, the same backslapping colleague whose casual familiarity had been the catalyst for her breakdown. Robert seemed to have an uncanny knack for noticing small changes. Meline, in her private life, had started taking better care of her hands, growing her nails out slightly and keeping them immaculately filed. It was a small, secret act of feminine expression. "Getting fancy on us, Madden?" Robert commented one afternoon, leaning against her cubicle wall with a sly grin. "Saw your nails. My wife's are never that perfect." "You got a secret girlfriend you're trying to impress." Panic, cold and electric, shot through Meline. She quickly curled her hands into fists and tucked them under her desk. "Just trying not to have hangnails," she mumbled, her face flushing. The incident, though minor, was a terrifying reminder of how precarious her double life was. The walls were thin, and Robert was always listening. But when the workday ended, and she closed the door of her apartment behind her, the performance could finally cease. Night was when Meline came alive. Her small apartment transformed from a simple living space into a sacred sanctuary, a laboratory for self-discovery. She would shed the restrictive Madden clothes, the relief so profound it was almost painful. She'd slip into a comfortable dress or soft leggings, and the simple act of feeling the right fabric against her skin was a balm to her frayed nerves. Her evenings were filled with rituals of becoming. She spent hours in front of the mirror, practicing her voice. She followed online tutorials, learning about pitch, resonance, and inflection. The process was frustrating. Her voice, trained for decades to be masculine, would crack and fail her. But then there were moments of success, a single sentence that sounded soft, feminine, hers, that would fill her with a triumphant joy. Online shopping became both a hobby and a necessity. She meticulously measured her body, poring over sizing charts, learning the language of inseams, bust measurements, and waistlines. Each package that arrived was a thrill, a new piece of her authentic self being delivered to her door. Her engineering mind found a strange comfort in the science of transition. She devoured medical journals and articles about hormone replacement therapy, HRT, studying the effects of estrogen and testosterone blockers with the same intensity she applied to a complex schematic. Understanding the biological mechanisms made the path forward feel less like a leap of faith and more like a logical, calculated progression. Renee was her anchor through it all. She was the only person who knew both Madden and Meline. She would come over for Meline nights, bringing wine and offering feedback on a new outfit or celebrating a small vocal victory. But Renee could also see the toll the duality was taking. "You look exhausted," Renee said one evening, watching Meline struggle to stifle a yawn. "You can't keep this up forever. Splitting yourself in two like this, it's going to break you." "I know," Meline admitted, her voice weary. "But what else can I do? Walk into my job tomorrow in a dress? I'd be fired before lunch." "No," Renee said, her expression serious. "But you can get professional help. Someone who understands this. I did some research." She handed Meline a piece of paper with a name and number on it. Dr. Evelyn Winters. She's a psychologist who specializes in gender identity. "Please, Meline. Just talk to her." The thought of confiding in another stranger was terrifying. It meant making it real in a way she hadn't before. But looking at Renee's concerned face and feeling the deep, bone-weary exhaustion within her, Meline knew she couldn't refuse. The waiting room of Dr. Winter's office was decorated in calming blues and grays. Meline sat, her hands clenched in her lap, her heart hammering. She was here as Madden, but she was about to speak of Meline. When the doctor called her name, she walked into the office on trembling legs. Dr. Winters was a woman in her late 50s with kind eyes and a serene, reassuring presence. She didn't press. She simply created a space for Meline to talk. Haltingly at first, then with a growing flood of words, Meline told her everything. The childhood confusion, the years of repression, the person in the mirror, the two lives, the constant, gnawing fear. When she finally fell silent, emotionally drained, Dr. Winters smiled gently. "Thank you for sharing that with me," the doctor said, her voice calm and validating. "I want you to hear this very clearly. You are not broken. You are not mentally ill. What you're describing is a classic, profound experience of gender dysphoria. You are a woman who has been forced to live as a man." She leaned forward slightly. "You are not sick, Meline. You are just finally allowing yourself to live authentically." Hearing the name Meline spoken aloud by a medical professional, treated not as a fantasy but as a fact, was transformative. It was permission. It was validation. A weight Meline hadn't even realized she was carrying lifted from her shoulders. She walked out of that office into the afternoon sun, blinking. The world looked different, sharper, more vibrant. The exhaustion was still there, but now it was mingled with a fragile, powerful new feeling, hope. Renee was right. She couldn't live two lives anymore. The performance was over. That night, she sat at her computer, pulled up her work email, and opened a new message. The cursor blinked on the blank page, a steady, rhythmic pulse, like a clock counting down to the first day of the rest of her life. The blinking cursor was a taunt. For 3 nights, Meline sat before the screen, writing and deleting, drafting and redrafting. How could she possibly condense a lifetime of hidden identity into a corporate memo? How could she explain the soul-deep certainty of being Meline to people who only knew the quiet shell of Madden? She consulted with Renee, who acted as both editor and emotional support. Keep it simple, professional, and direct, Renee advised, reading over a rambling, overly emotional draft. You're not asking for permission. You're stating a fact. Finally, drawing on her engineer's penchant for clarity and precision, she crafted the final version. Subject: Personal update regarding my identity. Dear team, I am writing to share some personal news. I am a transgender woman. From this point forward, I will be living and working as my authentic self. My name is Meline, and my pronouns are she/her. This is a significant step for me, and I understand it may be an adjustment for others. I am the same person and the same dedicated engineer you have worked with. I ask for your support and respect as I move forward. I have spoken with HR to ensure all administrative details are handled. I look forward to continuing to work with you all. Sincerely, Meline. Her finger hovered over the send button for a full minute. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and clicked. The email shot out into the digital ether, irrevocable. A wave of nausea and liberation washed over her in equal measure. There was no going back. The next morning, walking into the office was the hardest thing she had ever done. She had chosen her outfit with care: simple black trousers, a soft cream-colored blouse, and flat shoes. She wore her wig, styled neatly, and a light, subtle application of makeup. She felt intensely visible, as if every eye in the building was on her. The short walk from the elevator to her cubicle felt like a mile-long gauntlet. Whispers ceased as she approached, only to resume once she had passed. She could feel the stares on her back. An email pinged almost immediately. It was from Sandra, her department head, a pragmatic woman who valued results above all else. Meline, please see me in my office at 9:15. Meline's stomach clenched. She spent the next 30 minutes in a state of high anxiety, imagining the worst. At 9:15 sharp, she knocked on Sandra's door. Come in, Sandra said, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. She didn't smile, but her expression wasn't unkind. I received your email. Thank you for informing us directly. She steepled her fingers. I'll be blunt. My primary concern is the work. As long as your performance remains at its current high standard, your personal life is your own. I've already spoken with HR. They're updating your name in the system, your email address, and your security badge. If anyone, and I mean anyone, gives you a problem, you bring it directly to me. Understood? Yes, Meline breathed, a wave of relief making her dizzy. Thank you, Sandra. Good. Now, about the Q3 server migration. Sandra had already moved on. The support was professional, not personal, but it was support nonetheless. It was a shield. The reactions from her immediate colleagues were a painful, mixed bag. Mark, a friendly junior engineer she'd mentored on several projects, was conspicuously silent all day. He avoided her gaze, and when she tried to ask him a question about a shared file, he gave a one-word answer and quickly turned back to his screen. The rejection from someone she'd considered a friend was a sharp, unexpected sting. That evening, a text from him finally arrived. Hey, got your email. This is a lot to take in. I need some time to process this. The words were a wall between them. The most overt hostility came from Tyler, an arrogant engineer from another team. Meline was grabbing coffee from the break room when she overheard him talking to Robert just outside the door, his voice dripping with derision. Did you see Madden? Or whatever he's calling himself now, Tyler snickered. Seriously? This is an engineering firm, not a stage show. What's next? Are we all supposed to wear tutus to the weekly stand-up? Robert muttered something non-committal, but Tyler's laughter was loud and cruel. Meline froze, the coffee pot trembling in her hand. She felt her face flush with shame and anger. She wanted to storm out there and confront him, but her throat closed up. Instead, she waited until their footsteps faded before slinking back to her desk, the coffee forgotten, the cruel words echoing in her head. The final, devastating blow came that evening. Her phone rang, displaying her father's name. Coleman was a man forged from tradition and rigid principles, a former military officer who believed in order, discipline, and clearly defined roles. Meline's heart sank. She knew this call was coming. "Dad," she answered, her voice small. "I just got off the phone with your mother." Coleman's voice was dangerously low, stripped of all warmth. She was hysterical, babbling nonsense. "Tell me it's not true. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke." "It's not a joke, Dad," Meline said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "It's the truth. This is who I am. I'm a woman." A sound of pure disgust came through the phone. "A woman? I have a son. His name is Madden. I raised him to be a man. Strong. Honorable. Not this." The word hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Abomination. "Dad, please, just try to understand." "I will not," he roared, his voice cracking with fury. "You are throwing away your life. You are disgracing our family name. My son would never, ever be this thing. I don't know who you are, but you are not my child. You are dead to me." The line went dead. Meline stood frozen in her living room, the phone still pressed to her ear, the silence screaming at her. "Dead to me." The words were bullets, and they had found their mark. Her carefully constructed composure, already battered by the day's events, completely disintegrated. Her legs gave out, and she slid down the wall to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. A raw, animal sound of grief tore from her throat. She was Meline, yes, but at that moment, she was also profoundly, terrifyingly alone, gored by the rejection of the man who was supposed to love her unconditionally. She buried her face in her knees and wept, feeling as though she would break apart on the floor of her empty apartment. Under the careful supervision of Dr. Winters, Meline began her medical transition. The first step was hormone replacement therapy. She held the small, blue estrogen pills in her palm, her engineer's mind cataloging them as estradiol, while her heart saw them as tiny capsules of hope. Swallowing the first pill felt like a sacrament, a quiet, profound ceremony marking the beginning of her body's long journey home. The changes started subtly. A few weeks in, she noticed a new softness to her skin. The sharp, angular lines of her face seemed to gently blur. Then came the mood swings, a volatile emotional landscape she was unequipped to navigate. She would find herself crying over a sentimental commercial one moment and snapping with uncharacteristic irritation the next. It was disorienting, but Dr. Winters assured her it was a normal part of her body adjusting to a new hormonal reality. The most significant change began as a faint, tender ache in her chest. Soon, she could feel the first sensitive, firm buds of breast tissue forming. Looking at her changing torso in the mirror was a complex mix of emotions. There was a surge of euphoria. This was real, it was happening. But there was also a vulnerability. Her body was becoming visibly different, a secret she could no longer easily hide beneath a loose shirt. While her body was slowly mending its lifelong dissonance, her family was fracturing. The silence from her father was absolute, a cold, unbreachable wall. But her mother, Linda, was a different story. After a week of strained, tearful phone calls, Linda announced she was coming to visit. Meline spent the entire morning in a state of anxiety, changing her outfit 3 times before settling on neutral jeans and a simple blouse. When the doorbell rang, her heart leaped into her throat. Linda stood on the doorstep, her face etched with worry and confusion. Her eyes immediately took in Meline's longer hair, the softness of her face, the faint swell of her chest beneath the blouse. For a long moment, she just stared, her purse clutched in her hands like a shield. "Mom," Meline said, her voice barely a whisper. Tears welled in Linda's eyes. She stepped inside and, without a word, pulled her daughter into a fierce, trembling hug. Meline stiffened in surprise before melting into the embrace, a sob catching in her throat. Her mother's familiar scent of lavender and hairspray filled her senses, a scent from a childhood that felt a lifetime away. "Oh, my baby," Linda whispered, her voice thick with tears as she stroked Meline's hair. "I'm so sorry. All those years, you were hurting and I never saw it. I'm so sorry I didn't see you sooner." It wasn't perfect understanding, but it was love. It was a bridge being built across a chasm of fear. Just as one crucial bond began to heal, another started to show dangerous cracks. Renee, her rock, her first and most steadfast ally, was growing increasingly anxious. Her support, once effortless, was becoming tinged with a nervous, protective energy that felt smothering to Meline. The turning point came when Meline's prescription changed from pills to injections, a more effective delivery method for her hormones. Renee came over one evening and found Meline in the bathroom, laying out a sterile needle, a vial of estradiol valrate, and an alcohol swab on a clean towel. Dr. Winters had patiently walked her through the self-injection process, but the sight sent Renee into a panic. "What are you doing?" Renee gasped, her eyes wide with horror. "You can't be serious. You're not a doctor." Dr. Winters showed me exactly how to do it. "It's perfectly safe," Meline said, trying to keep her tone light, though Renee's reaction stung. "Safe? Meline, you're sticking a needle in yourself. I read online about the risks, hitting a nerve, blood clots, infections. Do you have any idea what could go wrong?" Renee's voice was high and sharp with fear. The dam of Meline's patience, worn thin by hormonal mood swings and the constant stress of her new life, finally broke. She was tired of being treated like a fragile problem to be solved. "Of course I know the risks, Renee," she snapped, turning to face her friend. "I've read more medical papers on this than you've read online horror stories. This is my body, and this is my reality now. I don't need you to come in here and treat me like I'm some reckless child playing with things I don't understand. This isn't judgment, it's concern." Renee shot back, her face flushed, clearly hurt by Meline's accusation. "I'm worried about you. You're my best friend." "Then trust me," Meline cried, her voice rising. "Trust that I know what I'm doing. Trust that this isn't some tragic, risky thing. This is just my life. I don't need your pity. It's not pity. It feels like it. It feels like you see my transition as a collection of risks and problems instead of just me finally being happy." The words hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Renee stared at her, her eyes filled with a wounded disbelief. She took a step back, shaking her head. "I can't watch this," she whispered, and turned and walked out, the click of the front door shutting behind her as loud as a gunshot in the silent apartment. Meline stood alone in the bathroom, the sterile needle gleaming under the light. Her anger evaporated, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread. She had just pushed away the one person who had been there from the very beginning. The feeling of isolation was absolute, a crushing weight that left her breathless. The silence in the apartment after Renee left was a physical presence. For 3 days, Meline moved through her life in a fog of loneliness. Every ping of her phone sent a jolt of hopeful anxiety through her, which quickly curdled into disappointment when it wasn't Renee. The victory of her mother's acceptance felt hollowed out by the loss of her best friend. She'd go to inject her hormones and hear Renee's frightened voice in her head, her own angry words echoing back at her. She had been so terrified of being abandoned that she had preemptively pushed away the person closest to her. On the 4th day, she couldn't bear it any longer. Humbled and miserable, she picked up the phone and dialed. Renee answered on the second ring, her hello, cautious and brittle. "I'm sorry," Meline said immediately, the words rushing out before she could lose her nerve. "I was an idiot. You were scared for me, and I attacked you for it. I was wrong. I think I'm just so afraid of being seen as a problem or a tragedy that I can't handle it when someone I love is worried. I pushed you away, and I'm so sorry." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then the sound of a shaky exhale. "I'm sorry, too," Renee said, her voice thick with emotion. "I came at you with all my fear instead of my support. It's just all so new, and I don't want anything to happen to you. I should have trusted you." The reconciliation was tearful and absolute, a mending that left their bond stronger than before. A week later, Renee came over with a flyer. "I think you should go," she said, placing it on the coffee table. It was for a local transgender support group that met in the basement of a community church. "You need to be around people who just get it. People who aren't your worried mom or your clueless best friend." Meline was hesitant, The idea of sharing her vulnerability with a room full of strangers was daunting. But she knew Renee was right. She couldn't navigate this journey entirely on her own. The following Tuesday, she found herself walking into the church basement. The room was filled with mismatched chairs arranged in a circle, a pot of stale coffee on a folding table in the corner. There were about a dozen people there, a diverse mix of ages, ethnicities, and presentations. A young man with fresh top surgery scars visible under his t-shirt was talking animatedly with an older, elegantly dressed woman. Meline took a seat in the corner, feeling shy and exposed. For the first hour, she just listened. A young trans woman spoke about the agony of waiting for her name change to be legally processed. A non-binary person discussed the frustration of explaining their pronouns to their family for the 10th time. A trans man shared a small victory, using the men's restroom for the first time without incident. With each story, Meline felt a knot of isolation inside her begin to loosen. These were her struggles, her fears, her triumphs, echoed in the voices of others. She wasn't alone. When it was her turn to speak, she found her voice. "My name is Meline," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I came out at work a few months ago. My dad disowned me, but my mom is trying. And I'm just really glad to be here." After the meeting, as people were milling about, a woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a warm smile approached her. "Hi, I'm Clara," she said. "What you said about your parents, that really hit home. It's brave, what you're doing." Clara was a few years older and further along in her transition. She spoke with a quiet confidence that Meline admired. They talked for nearly an hour about everything and nothing, shared frustrations with laser hair removal, the joy of finding a pair of shoes that fit, the complicated dance of family. For the first time, Meline was having a conversation where her transness wasn't the central, unspoken topic, but simply a shared context, a common language. There was an easy, gentle spark between them. A few weeks later, after several post-support group coffees, there was an unexpected knock on Meline's door. She opened it to find her father standing awkwardly in the hallway. Coleman looked older than she remembered, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look at her face, but at a point just over her shoulder. The silence was heavy, thick with months of anger and hurt. He was holding a small, crumpled paper bag. "Your mother," he began, his voice raspy, she wouldn't let it go. "Said I was a stubborn old fool." He looked down at his shoes. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and when he looked up, his eyes finally met hers. He took in her appearance, the woman standing before him, and for a moment, his face was a mask of confusion and pain. "I don't understand this," he said, his voice raw. "I may never understand it. But..." He faltered, clearing his throat. "But you're still my child. And if Meline, is who you are, then I will try." He thrust the paper bag towards her. "Your mother made your favorite, the oatmeal raisin cookies." It wasn't a full-throated apology. It wasn't complete acceptance. But it was a beginning. It was a crack of light. Meline took the bag, her eyes welling with tears. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. That night, Meline stood before her mirror. For years, the mirror had been her enemy, a source of conflict and pain. Tonight, she looked at her reflection and felt a profound sense of peace. She saw her soft hair, her clear eyes, the gentle curve of her body beneath her clothes. She saw the woman who had fought through fear and rejection, who had found community and forgiveness. She saw Meline. And for the first time, she smiled at her reflection with pure, unadulterated self-love. On her laptop, an email sat waiting in her inbox. The subject line read, "Confirmation of legal name and gender marker change." Her new birth certificate was in the mail. The final paperwork for scheduling her gender-affirming surgery was on her desk, ready to be filled out. The journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more prejudice, more moments of doubt. There would be surgery and recovery, new relationships to navigate, and a world that was still learning to see her. But looking at the strong, resilient woman in the mirror, Meline knew one thing for certain. The journey had truly begun, and she was finally walking it as herself.